I'd like to thank Banggood for sending me this camera. I do apologise that 3 seconds into my first maiden flight, I dropped it into a knee-deep stream. Today you're going to learn something. Make sure you put your crossfire antenna on your radio before you start flying. Hi guys, so as you can see, the Foxeer mix finally arrived. It's taken some time to come, mainly due to the Chinese New Year. And I want to start this video with a little bit of a waffle, like I always do, so apologies for that if you don't like that sort of stuff. But yonks ago, must be well over a year ago, I got my first Runcam split, and I was so excited about getting it because I was flying super light 3 and 4 inch quads. It answered everything I really wanted, a small light camera that gave pretty good HD footage. And then mine died mid-flight and I lost a quad, and then the next one died, and then I got the Caddx Turtle and that died, and then I got the Caddx Turtle V2, which somewhat miraculously has survived. So there's kind of a bit of an evolution going on here. This is the Runcam Split Mini V2 with the faulty M8 lens. And this is the Runcam Split Mini 2, which they cunningly changed the lens on it to a bigger M12 lens and changed the camera housing. So this is the one that originally comes on the Diaton GT249 Plus HD that I've been flying, and this is the one that you need to replace it with, which Runcam sent free of charge following me complaining about the lens issues on this guy. And as you can see, mine's dismantled because this one died on me, whether via a crash or mid-flight, and I can't for love nor money get it working again. And the culprit for me is this crappy ribbon cable, which is actually really good quality but just doesn't suit our purposes as people who crash and get stuck in scraggle, etc., because it's too stiff. It doesn't move enough, and if you've got something that has no sort of play in it, the end result is you're going to damage this connector or the ribbon itself, and I suspect that's exactly what has happened to mine. So moving on to the Foxeer, if this isn't a million times better than any of the previous ones, for me it's going to be a big failure, because Foxeer have frankly sat on the backsides for the last year and a half while everybody else has released these things and done nothing. So releasing this late into the game, it better be something special, because otherwise it's just riding on the bandwagon of the Acrobrat and frames like that, which have made these things popular again. So let's have a look. So we get some destructions, and here's the camera. And this is as far as I've got with my own unboxing, so you're kind of seeing this as I am. My first impression is, why in God's name is it so big? Why is it so big? Or long, should I say? Like, if we compare it to the Split Mini 2, it's a fair bit bigger. But look at that. So I don't know what anybody else is thinking right now, but I'm thinking you're going to need a pretty flexible quad to get this in. And it feels heavy. So if Foxeer want people to use this, this better be amazing, because if the HD quality is the same as all of these guys, you'd be mad to use this thing when you can use a much smaller camera. It feels quality though, I'll give them that, and hopefully the lens is better than the Caddx, which tends to be a bit rubbish, and the Split I think has a slightly better lens. But my major issue with all of these guys is the FPV feed, which at best can be called usable, and at worst is unflyable, or simply sucks the life and the fun out of any flying that you do. So all of these guys suffer from the same problem, the splits and the Caddx. The FPV feed is really washed out regardless of what you do, and it's best in bright sunlight. On a cloudy day it's really murky, and it really becomes difficult to see anything unless you're flying in a giant open space. On a bright sunny day it's okay, it's certainly usable. When the sun drops it becomes difficult to make out anything, to be blunt. So I'm hoping that this guy will solve that problem, because frankly I don't really care if the HD footage is better than any of these. What I really want to see is give me an FPV feed that I can use. So that's what I'm aiming for. Interesting it doesn't come connected, but fair enough. It does come in credit to Foxeer, with a ton of nylon standoffs and spacers, nuts and spacers, etc., which is really good of them, because the little sort of spacers are hard to find. We've got the usual cables, and we've got the little SD card holder to stop your SD card pinging out. Let's have a look at it. So the SD card slot's there, so I'm guessing this just sort of sits over here like that, just to stop your SD card pinging out in flight. And as you can see, we've got the board itself is either 30.5 or 20 by 20, so obviously just remove this outer PCB if you don't want to use it. We've got a little microphone here, which, unlike the Caddx, isn't dangling off by a bit of wire, which I immediately cut off. And let's just have a look at the boards. They're very similar in terms of layout and design. So it looks like business as usual, to be honest with you. Can't see anything that's a deal breaker. It's nice that it's got pads on it, which I prefer, and that was one thing I liked about the Split Mini 2 actually, and the fact that it had two buttons. It didn't have one of these silly plastic connectors which just make it difficult to mount. And it'll be interesting to see how this runs. The Caddx V2 runs, but the board gets relatively warm. The Runcam Split Mini 2, you could fry an egg on it. It really becomes burningly hot, which when you're putting it in a quad you really need to be careful of. So yeah, so it all kind of looks pretty standard. So the big thing about this guy is going to be the performance, and that's what obviously you're here to see. Just before we get to that, just want to have a look at weight, which is obviously going to be a big issue, or a big thing to be careful of if you're running little quads. So if we look at the Caddx with its cable, there's a bit of a zip tie on there, but we won't worry about that. So that's 14 grams with its wire. The Split Mini's only got one wire on, but it'll give us an idea. So probably 13 grams with its wires, a little bit lighter. This guy is a good 4 grams heavier than even the Caddx, and that's not even including its wiring. And okay, I'm being a little bit unfair because it's still got its PCB surround on it, but that's going to weigh next to nothing. So yeah, it's a fat old thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in a quad, and we'll see what the score is. If you've been following the videos this is my GT249, which has got the Caddx V2 in it, and this is my flight bag with 5 packs in it. And you can see the Caddx V2 is basically as big as this frame can take, and even then I'm losing quite a bit of camera protection. So there's no way on God's earth I'm going to be able to fit this in without it sticking out like so. So I don't know what the new canopies that Diaton are releasing are going to be like. From what I can see, it just has a bigger hole for the Caddx lens, and possibly it probably sticks out a little bit further, but it's not going to fit the Foxeer in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the other quad which I was flying, which will probably give us a little bit of jello, so you're going to have to ignore that. But at least in this quad I've got enough room to at least give the camera some protection. So what I'll do is, in fact, before I just go on, the other thing I want to talk about with all of these guys is every one of them, whether it's the Split or the Caddx, suffer from this irritating sort of video interference. And I've tried a million things to correct it, and you never really get rid of it entirely. It's not sort of the noise that you would generally expect to get on FPV feed when you pump the gas and you get lines across your video feed, etc. It's just a sort of constant, sort of very fine lining across the entirety of your FPV feed, and it never goes away. It just sort of stays there regardless of what you do, regardless of whether you're inputting a lot of throttle or anything. It's just some sort of interference, and the Caddx has got it. The Split has it, although I think a little bit less. So it'll be interesting to see if this guy suffers the same, because one thing Foxeer have said is that it's going to have less noise, and that might be something that's really interesting to you, because, as I said, the FPV feed on all of these guys is frankly shit. So yeah, so I'm going to stick up my quad. Let's see what we see. We'll have a look at the FPV feed, we'll have a look at the HD feed, but if I were you and I was looking at buying one of these, I would make your choice based on the FPV feed, because that's the thing that will drive you crazy. The fisheye that you will get from these lenses and all the rest of it can be corrected in post if you've got the time or effort to do so. There's naff all you can do if the FPV feed stops you from seeing where you're going. Right, this is the second time that I've done this journey, because yesterday I came down and it was also a sunny morning, and I took off with the Quattro Volante with the mix in it. 3 seconds later I fail-safed into a stream, which turned out to be because I'd forgotten to put my Crossfire TX antenna on my radio when I switched from the Diatone, which is running an XM Plus, to the Quattro Volante, which is running Crossfire. So the quad basically sat in knee-deep water for about 5 to 10 minutes while I cut my way through brambles and then waded and got it. And yesterday afternoon I baked it at a very low temperature for about 20 minutes in the oven and then left it to dry in the airing cupboard. And then last night I started testing things, and from what I can tell it looks like the ESCs are fine. It looks like the camera might be okay. The Talon F7 flight controller works, but it appears that the voltage regulator in it is damaged. Instantly the image is over sharpened in my opinion, and this is something that the Split and the Caddx all share, but both the Split and the Caddx allow you to turn the sharpening down, and I tend to run with a much lower sharpening, and if in post I feel like it's too soft, then I can easily sharpen the image, where it's much more difficult to get rid of this super sharp artificial image that the Foxeer is producing. The colours seem relatively good, and this is a particularly nasty area to film HD footage, because there's tons of sort of dead long grass, all of which is the same colour. If we look at the Caddx image, you can see immediately it's much softer, and in my opinion much smoother and more natural looking. And the thing that I like about it is because the colours aren't eye-wateringly contrasty or anything like that, it's pretty easy to colour grade. Everything's really sort of neutral and soft, and I personally prefer that. I think comparing these two cameras is a little bit like going into a sort of TV shop, and whenever you go into a TV shop they always have the TV set up and the brightest, most contrasty settings possible to make them look amazing. It has a lot of fisheye, which you'll notice when I go higher. You can see it there, look at that. A huge amount of fisheye and distortion, and that tends to be a common across most of these cameras, although the Foxeer seems to be at face value worse. The footage that you're looking at is a lot less contrasty than what I was seeing on my goggles, but even though the sort of colours were pretty on the goggles, everything sort of looked almost out of focus, to the point where I sort of tested the focus on the camera several times just to make sure it wasn't out of focus, which it wasn't. And this is sort of the same on all these cameras. Everything just becomes sort of muddy and sort of messy, and you can't really pick out particular fine details. So if you're a sort of fixed wing pilot and you're doing long range or something like that, they'll be fine. But for our purposes as FPV pilots, if you want to get sort of down and dirty and amidst trees and under branches and stuff like that, you just can't see scraggle at all. It makes it really difficult to fly proximity, and that applies to all the cameras, the Split, the Caddx, and the mix. So because this lens sticks out like a bloody dildo, I thought I'd try a different lens on the camera, and this is with a Runcam Micro Eagle, which tends to be a pretty good lens. And I thought I'd focus this or as well as I could, but while I was focusing it, I sort of tended to find that either I had the background or the foreground in focus, but neither sort of perfect either way. And when I got to the field and looked at the distant objects, I could clearly see straight away that I was out of focus. What I'm trying to do here is combat two things. One, the ridiculous fisheye that the Foxeer lens has, and you can see that this this lens has it as well, but not to as great an extent. But what I'm really mainly trying to do is shorten the lens, because running the Eagle lens like this, it shortens the overall length of the camera by sort of pretty much sort of 7mm, 8mm, which makes it far more attractive to put in a micro quad than it was previously. So that's it really. In terms of overall opinions, I think the mix is a bit of a failure, to be honest with you. It does nothing better than any other of the splits or the Caddx. It has marginally better FPV colours, but the image is still washed out and muddy and dirty. It's very sort of pixelated even when you look at the raw footage, which is unusual actually, and I find it way over sharpened. And because of the menu structure they've given you, there's no way to adjust that. You can't use the sharpening setting like you can on the split and the Caddx. So for me, Foxeer have basically dropped a clanger here. They've released a product that's heavier than everything else. The FPV feed isn't really any better. The HD feed, some will say, is much better, but for me, from an editing point of view, I think it's not, because it's already pretty contrasty and pretty colourful, and it's too sharp. So that's my view on it. Like all these things, make your own mind up. It's difficult to judge a camera on sort of looking at videos and stuff like this, so it's really something that you'll have to make up your own mind. I wonder whether the Foxeer looks particularly bad because I'm using the Fat Shark HDOs, which have particularly sharp screens. Maybe on a set of goggles with a lower resolution, it wouldn't be as obvious what was going on, but on the HDOs, it was just really muddy. So that's it, guys. Hope that was useful. Cheers. Bye bye.